And I was also in court yesterday and heard what the magistrate had to say. And it is a very different set of circumstances from my home country, the UK, where there was a huge amount of surprise from the very start of this case, when it was pretty much a free-for-all for both local and international media to write and report and speculate and interview whoever they could and interview the former detective on the case and so on. As one of your speakers mentioned there, the jury system makes a huge difference. In the UK, we have a jury, and therefore there are very strict rules on what can be reported once somebody has been charged with a crime. And I remember covering some of these stories when I was working there, and you would sort of research them and find things out, but there'd be a ban on using any of it, and you'd store it up for many months, ready for publication, really on the day that this person was convicted, if indeed they were convicted. To be honest, in many respects, I really applaud the transparency of the South African court system. That many of the rules, which sometimes can be over strict, are not applying, even if it is maybe a consequence more of the vagaries of is there a judge or a jury. So I think it's different from many countries, and I think it's also it's been interesting that actually there's probably been less intrusion into Oscar Pistorius's private life in the last few months than one might have seen in Britain or America. Actually quite few snatched photographs and other things. So I wouldn't entirely condemn everything that's happened, although clearly those leaked photos of the bathroom was a step too far.
Yes, well, I mean, that is the origin of the rule, the sub judice rule, is to protect juries from sort of evidence that might not be admissible, and where they don't have legal training and they don't deal with this kind of thing every day. The reason for the rule is not present in South Africa, where a judge or a magistrate has training on what evidence is admissible and what to take into account. And so if he sees these photos and decides for whatever reason in the trial that they're not admissible, then he's trained and used to not taking them into account. I mean, it's sort of human nature whether they will or won't, but the idea behind it is a judge has legal training, will apply his mind to the evidence appropriately. And so the fact that you might have this extraneous discussion about evidence and other photographs or other information, interviews with witnesses even, being out there in the public, is in our system thought not to affect the presiding officer in the same way.
Well, to the same extent that Oscar Pistorius makes his money running for a living, you could argue it's much more important what the public think of him. Of course, The money comes from sponsorship. The money comes from companies willing to give this man vast amounts of money to be a brand ambassador, to wear their sunglasses, to simply be seen to be in their corner. So from the very beginning, Pistorius and his family have been quite aware of this fact that even if he were to be found not guilty, even if he were to walk out of the court a completely free man, he would have to manage that aspect of it in order for him to continue his career, to make money going forward. So there has been a focus on public relations right from the beginning. That being said, Pistorius and his family do seem to be focusing on the case more so than on the public relations side. They could have done a great many things to really try this case in the media. They could have given a great number of interviews in order to seek sympathy. So far, we haven't seen any evidence of them doing so, to the extent that they may jeopardize the case, to the extent that this may become an issue before the magistrate. But they have been managing the public perception with a light touch. Well, quite so. Look, the family would have very little choice in terms of keeping this matter before the public. We have very rarely seen this amount of public interest in a matter. It's the health of Nelson Mandela is about the only local story I can think of where people have such an intense fascination with it and demand wall-to-wall coverage. That, of course, is perhaps part of the reason why we have seen ethical breaches from the media. The legalities of it aside, we have seen some very problematic instances. The best example being almost immediately after the shooting on Valentine's Day, we started hearing rumors that large amounts of money were being offered to, for instance, police officers for inside information, for photographs and so on and so forth. That was then eventually confirmed when the former investigating officer, Hilton Werther, came out and talked about very large sums of money being waved around. Now, to be clear, all of the instances that we've heard this of have been from foreign media, primarily British tabloids, coming across with their checkbooks. But that's of enormous concern for us in the media. There are very good reasons why we have strict rules within the South African media saying checkbook journalism is not allowed. So legally we may not have a problem here, but ethically there have been breaches.
Obviously the transparency, it can be either very good for the system or it can also be bad, especially if the reporting is not accurate. And then people get in their own minds a certain view of what happened in the courtroom, and then when somebody says acquitted, and people cannot understand why the person is acquitted, and they get very cross because it was reported in a way that made it sound as if a person is guilty. And that could create problems for the judicial system, obviously. So accuracy is important, and I think that is a very strong and important ethical consideration, which is not necessarily legal, but ethical consideration that the media should have. But also the problem is that I feel that sometimes the media treat people differently depending on how famous they are, how much money they have, the race of the accused, all these kinds of things. And they treat some people far worse than others, some accused people far worse than others. And I think the media has to think about how they actually treat all accused persons in a way that is both fair but accurate. And if it's going to be accurate, you're going to sometimes publish things about people that is not going to be good for their reputation.